We have a massive official visit list to preview.
Locked On presents The Portal, the daily podcast covering college football recruiting and everything NIL. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back into the Portal Podcast, where you get your daily recruiting, NIL, and transfer portal scoop. I'm your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football writer and recruiting analyst. Thank you for making the Portal Podcast your first listen each and every day. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. All across the country, the June 13th weekend is massive. Florida, Georgia, up north, Notre Dame, Penn State, you name it. They all have big official visit weekends. But since I've got John Garcia Jr. on with me today, we're going to focus on the South, the programs inside the Sunshine State, Georgia, Alabama, some of the programs down south and all their recruits. So let's bring on Mr. Garcia. John, how you doing today, sir?
Doing well, man. Just trying to keep up. Every time we do one of these, it's like news breaks during the show or soon after. So just trying to see who's next up for us.
That is true. Speaking of a guy that is always in the news, Isaiah Williams. He's going to be back at the University of Florida for an OB this weekend out of Tavares, Florida, just outside of Orlando. Maybe, depending on how you want to rank him, the best edge rusher / possible edge rusher at the next level. Athletic as all get out. What is the latest with Isaiah?
Well, yeah, he confirmed that Florida official visit, and that alone is pretty big news, Brian. As you know, he's an Orlando kid, lifelong Gator fan, was, of course, committed to Florida for some time before a surprise flip to the Ole Miss Rebels. Some folks, down here didn't think this visit would come to fruition. Isaiah had flipped from Florida to Ole Miss, and then he went back to Ole Miss last weekend. So there was a small percentage of folks that thought, hey, maybe this kid shuts it down. His parents went up with him to Oxford kind of for the first time to see where their son is verbally committed. But lo and behold, Florida has stuck with this. You have to nowadays. He's arguably the top linebacker, not only in Florida, maybe the entire class. I mean, serious Jalen Walker vibes when you watch the tape of Isaiah Williams. So any chance to get a guy like that, a lot of programs are going to be steadfast and try to maintain communication regardless of circumstance. And for Florida, if they do get him on campus, which is the current plan as of this afternoon, this will be his first return to Gainesville since decommitting from Billy Napier and company. So that alone is fascinating, right? Florida's on a roll right now. They've gotten a ton of great recruits on campus. They've closed with some priority guys, and they're going to get a few more here in the days and weeks to come. But if you were in that room and you saw their board, I think Isaiah Williams would be near the top of it. So big visit in the state of Florida with Williams going back to Gainesville for the first time since that decommitment. Other teams are trying to position themselves to get this visit. It was thought to be somewhat open because people didn't know, hey, the kid just decommitted from there. Is he really going to go back? He's in state. He's been there a bunch of times. Does he need to go back? There was a lot of back and forth behind the scenes on which programs can maybe swoop in and push Florida out. But Florida stayed on it, and Isaiah is excited to go back and see what is to offer this time around in Gainesville. It's a little bit different when you're not committed and you just flipped away from the program, and sometimes a program doubling down on the recruitment despite you, frankly, disappointing them. It says a lot about where you do stand on the board, and for some recruits, that can start to open the gate for a possible, reconnection. So it'll be a very interesting weekend in Gainesville. Isaiah's not doing a lot of media, understandably so. Very coveted, very busy, a lot of fluidity in this recruitment. But no doubt Florida's getting him on campus this weekend, and it's a pretty big development.
Speaking of the Gators, let's just touch on their visit list. It's their last one. They're not having anybody for some reason on June 20th. So June 13th, they got Kaiden Prothro, arguably the best flex tight end out of Georgia. James Johnson, Miami Northwestern, big-time defensive tackle. Isaiah. Trenton Henderson, I believe, is visiting. He's the edge rusher at a Catholic in Pensacola. He's a big-time player. Kendall Gerville, defensive tackle out of Fort Myers High School. JaReylan McCoy out of Tupelo, Mississippi. Malik Morris out of Lakeland. All these are national recruits, and I didn't even write down all the names that are visiting Florida. Am I wrong to assume the Gators could make a big push just with this group, and they got some other guys from the last couple of weekends that could pledge as well? Could we see a 3, 4, 5 commitment, 7, 8 day span coming up for the Gators? Is that out of the question?
I don't think it's out of the question. We've seen them already sort of do that on the front end, right? You know, they got Caden Hall, they got Carr, they got a bunch of guys verbally committed in very short order. So why not see that continue? Chancellor Campbell was a big one head-to-head with the Georgia Bulldogs. So, yeah, I think the visit list very much coincides with some of that expectation in Gainesville. I think the biggest, maybe surprise on that list outside of Isaiah Williams is JaReylan McCoy. He already took his official visit to Florida. So now he's getting in the car and driving back down to Gainesville for an unofficial visit. And I think it tells you it is a huge advantage for the Gators. Texas looked like the school just about a month ago that was in the driver's seat with Florida pushing. And now I think that pendulum has shifted back in favor of the Gators. You don't take 2 visits in a 3-week span if there's not considerable interest both ways. So I think the Gators could pluck one of the best in the state of Mississippi, which is a huge win if it goes down for Billy Napier. Carson Baker, another, Georgia running back,
right?
One of the fastest backs in this class of 2026. He's going back to Gainesville, even though he already took an official visit there. So I think those 2 names in terms of commitment watch would be top of mind. Javari Lucas commits on the 16th. That date is already set. He is admitted Florida is his top school, big offensive lineman out of Glade Central, down in the muck in the state of Florida, related to Kelvin Taylor and Fred Taylor. So
there you go.
Pipeline in that family. So I think, conservatively, those 3 guys look like they could be next up for the Gators. But if everything aligns, and you talk about an Isaiah Williams, you talk about some of these other guys that they're in contention for, it could be, the turning point in the perception of this recruiting class. This weekend, this stretch could be the turning point of, hey, well, what's going on with Florida? A slow start like we've talked about on this show. And then that transforms to, well, Florida's looking like they're running away with one of the best classes in the SEC and arguably the best class in state. And if they're in that position, you're looking at a back-to-back, top 10 group. And that's just not something that is chalk in the state of Florida any longer. So Florida is aligning a lot on the positive end of this thing right now. And yeah, you should expect at least a couple more commitments in short order.
Well, they've certainly done a very good job. When we come back, we're going to be talking about one of their main rivals, the team they're going to play on the road this year, Miami, talk about Bama, talk about Georgia, and more. That is next here on the Portal Podcast. The NBA Finals are really getting underway now. We've got a great series between Oklahoma City and the Pacers. The intensity, the buzzer beaters, and all the great action. You can check it out live with Game Time. As the game gets closer, tip-off comes even closer to you. The prices go down on the app, so make sure you check out Game Time. Here's an example, up to 60% off on zone deals on Game Time. For the NBA Finals, that'd be pretty awesome. And as somebody that is from Indiana, I can tell you, where the Pacers play, that arena is incredible. Make sure you check out Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time's app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Mr. Garcia, we have none other than the Miami Hurricanes up next. They just got 2 commitments. They knock out Cannon Pickett, offensive tackle out of Tampa Bay Tech, 6'4", 320. Could play inside as well. Alex Mirabal is up to 6 O-line commits. They got Jackson Cantwell in that group. They're running for a really big class there. They're still after Brett Colwage, and they also get a kid out of Hoover, Alabama. Refresh everybody's memory. Where did you first meet Mario Cristobal? Where was that?
It was just north of Birmingham. I believe we were in Decatur, Alabama, scouting out the same offensive lineman who ended up, of course, playing for him while he was the offensive line coach there in Tuscaloosa.
There you go. So They go up, they get a defensive lineman out of Alabama to add to what's a pretty deep room. You know, it's just like Tyson Bacon picking Alabama or Tennessee wasn't surprised, but he ends up committing to Tennessee. Now he's going to Miami. Did not see that one happening. Miami, do you think they got a legit shot now to have a top 10 class? Is it trending in that direction? They're after Brett Colajay, et cetera. Where do you think they are?
Yeah, and it's no surprise based on the catalyst, right? We said it when Jackson Cantwell committed. This was going to spark a lot of positivity for the U. You just talked about Florida's big visit weekend, the 13th. Miami's big visit weekend was last weekend, was the weekend of the 6th. A lot of commits were back in town, including Cantwell. Yet a lot of top targets also flanked those guys in Coral Gables. And I think, a Cannon Pickett committing may be expected, legacy guy. Clemson really wanted him. So this was a bigger battle than maybe folks realize. And he's canceled the Florida OV that was supposed to go down this coming weekend. So he's all but done and wrapped up for the U. But the big surprise was certainly Tyson Bacon. Like you said, this was a guy who is from Birmingham, Hoover High School, early commit to Tennessee, surprised a lot of people on the front end. But after that point, Bama was involved, Georgia was involved, and all of a sudden Florida, a lot of SEC schools, and you said, okay, if a move were to happen here, this looks like, I don't know, an old school Alabama, Georgia type of battle for a top 100 defensive lineman. But lo and behold, Miami gets him on campus and blows him away. They were kind of a sneaky dark horse going into the weekend. They had hosted him one time prior, and he'd really talked up the U, but just because he's a Hoover kid, he's a Birmingham kid, folks just expected this to be at a minimum an SEC type deal, especially with the visits that were on Bacon's itinerary. But you got to get the kids on campus, and I think that says a lot about the closing ability of this coaching staff under Mario Cristobal. You expect it from the head coach, but it's evident on down with that Hurricane coaching staff right now. There's a very positive feeling there that they're going to go on a heck of a run on the trail and not only challenge for the top class in the ACC, which would right now be 2 or 3 overall because Clemson has been so dominant thus far in the cycle, but maybe a number 1 overall class. I don't think that is out of the question. They're in it for Derrek Cooper, 5-star running back, maybe the favorite there, although he's going to Georgia this weekend. I know we'll talk about that in a minute. They're trying to flip Tristan Keys. They're trying to flip Vance Spafford. They feel decent about both of those. So if they can grab one of those two, that obviously says a lot. They've got a great secondary haul already. The offensive line group, as you mentioned, maybe the best in the country, led by the number 1 player in the country. So if things continue to trend that way, Miami's going to be, not only a top 5 sort of lock, but they're going to have an outside shot at the number 1 class, depending on how things go at USC, not only the rest of the offseason, but during the season itself, which is, as we know, just as important in how these classes come together. So if Miami does what we think they're going to do on the field, flirt with another double-digit win season and be sort of steady as she goes, it's got an opportunity to continue to reach a higher ceiling on the recruiting front. So a fascinating development, and grabbing a Bacon, grabbing a Cantwell. I mean, these are guys that 6 months ago, people weren't giving Miami a chance to compete with, much less win out for. So I just think it shows once again, it's the SEC and the Big Ten in that order when it comes to recruiting 100%. But if that U logo pops up, if that Clemson Tiger Paw logo pops up, all bets are off. You got to consider those programs in the long run because they're offering something unique right now. Miami, combining the city and the culture there with the rise and return of glory potentially of that program. NIL's good, private education, all of that. And Clemson, one of the most unique cultures in the country. When kids go there, it's like they're in or they're out almost instantly. Clemson knows where it stands pretty early with a lot of top recruits. And that's why both of these programs right now are recruiting at a top 5 clip. And they're in position to potentially crash the party at number 1 overall if things keep trending the right way.
You touched on Georgia. Here are a few of the kids they got visiting this weekend. Jared Curtis, the 5-star offensive player of the year candidate for Lord only knows how many different awards this fall. He's a quarterback out of Christian High School in Nashville. Tyler Atkinson, Grayson, maybe the best combo linebacker, along with Elijah Williams. or Isaiah Williams, excuse me, in the country. He's visiting. You've got Derrek Cooper, Zach Ford, who's committed, Valdon Sohn, the kid from Virginia, the big D tackle, Brett Colajay, who Miami's battling for, maybe the best interior lineman in the country, and Brody Jennings, kid you and I saw that was dominant at Under Armour earlier this year. That's just some of their list. Same question as I had when I had to discuss UF. Any chance that UGA makes a little run here, or is that hyperbole on my part?
Look, I think a couple of those guys are getting very close to a decision. I want to talk about Derrek Cooper. This is a prospect that today, 6 months ago, a year ago, you said, hey, who are the top two in this recruitment? And at every single juncture, I would have said Miami and Georgia, or Georgia and Miami, one way or the other. Today, it feels like Miami's got a slight edge over Georgia, but two things favor the Bulldogs here. One, he's going back this weekend for the first time since his birthday. Official visit. We all know, red and black carpet, the whole deal. And two, he's talking about moving up that timeline. He's talking about coming off the board just a little bit sooner than expected. He already took the Miami OV, and now he's going to Georgia to potentially wrap up the recruiting process. So if the intel is correct, and look, NIL, so many things can throw this stuff off, but if everything we hear is correct here, this decision could come in sooner rather than later, and it could set off a huge set of dominoes in one direction or the other on a lot of folks' running back boards, because there's not a lot of great talent left at the position. A lot of guys are already verbally committed. He's kind of one of the last remaining big dogs. Him, Jay Lamar, there's not many unless you're trying to flip somebody. So when Cooper makes his decision, that'll have a huge impact. But like I said, at any juncture of this thing, it's been Georgia, Miami, Miami, Georgia. So with the Bulldogs getting the last visit, we think before a verbal commitment, he's talking about moving that timeline up as early as mid-June. So, this visit wraps up June 15th, and he's on commitment watch sort of thereafter. So if that's the case and you're Kirby Smart, you feel pretty good about getting that last official visit. So I think that's one of the key recruitments left in the entire country. You mentioned Tyler Atkinson. He just set this official visit. Kind of interesting. He doesn't let out a whole lot in terms of his schedule, and obviously 5-star unanimous, number one, number two linebacker in the country, regardless of where you look. Huge visit implications wherever he ends up. He was up at Oregon. He was at Clemson prior to that. Both of those programs feel like they're absolutely in it. But I think for the long haul, a lot of folks, think this one looks up at Georgia, and it's Georgia's race to lose here. He's an in-state linebacker who's been prioritized since, 8th grade by Kirby Smart. So, it really is going to be an interesting weekend with Atkinson in town. The ball certainly feels like it's in Georgia's court. And again, just like we talked about with Cooper, you get a more, final impression during the official visit weekend. So Georgia's got a lot of positivity on its front. Brett Colajay is another one, as you mentioned, an ascending prospect, maybe the top available interior guy in the class going forward. Miami's there. Georgia's there. He went up to Ohio State and liked it. Colorado's where he's from. They got an official visit. So this one has a lot more contenders, but I was told flat out, Colajay will not commit until he wraps up that Georgia visit. Like, that trip has to happen before he comes off the board. So when you hear elements like that, there's just a higher priority on some of these prospects getting to certain programs. And Breck is a no-nonsense, hit him in the mouth, I'll play wherever you need and make something happen kind of guy. So that style fits a lot of what Georgia wants to be on the offensive line. So, yeah, they're going to be in position for a lot of these guys. They're one or two at worst for just about every name that you mentioned. So no surprise, Georgia's going to close very well in every facet, whether it's the offseason, official visit season, December, early signing period, whatever it is. That's another logo. Again, when it pops up and you're a fan of another school, you kind of worry a little bit, and it's for good reason.
Speaking of logos that matter, we're going to talk about Alabama next, a school that's going to be playing at Georgia this year. That is next here on the Portal Podcast. Thank you once again for making the Portal Podcast your first listen each and every day. And thank you to Mr. Garcia for hopping on to help me out with this. A lot of information today, and we're not even, honestly, touching a third of what we need to. I mean, talk about LSU or Ole Miss or A&M or Texas. We got Bama, though. Steve Wiltfong put out a Fong bomb for none other than Jireh Edwards from St. Francis to go to Bama. I know I did a podcast earlier today with Zach Blackerby, Locked on Auburn. He was not very happy about that, but that was a rather funny moment. But it is what it is. Bama, that logo carries weight too. What have you heard with Alabama? It sounds like they're going to get Jireh, but what players have you heard are trending with the Tide? And then we'll get into the official visit list.
Yeah, I think when you talk about some of the best players in the country, Alabama's feeling very good about some of the recent players they've had on campus. You just mentioned maybe the biggest name, Jireh Edwards, number one safety in the country, for us at Rivals. Just a guy you don't have to watch a lot to understand why A&M, Georgia, Bama, Auburn, everybody, Florida wants this kid. He's just an alpha back there. So the momentum Alabama has created there, which is pretty tangible at this point, is noteworthy, but it's not just him. I think Xavier Griffin, Ohio State was a wild card visit, and maybe they're sneaking up on some folks relative to an Xavier Griffin projection. A lot of folks expect him to end up, back in SEC country after that USC decommitment. And I still think that's the case. Bama just got him back on campus. He's a Huntsville native. He's a legacy to Alabama on his mother's side. That momentum, I think, is pretty clear and tangible for the Crimson Tide. So if you're talking about, a defensive class, a recruiting class, and you're starting with the number one safety and one of the most intriguing front seven players, wherever he ends up, Xavier Griffin, in the class, you're in a very good spot. They've already got Jordan Edmonds and Zion Gibson committed defensively, maybe the best corner tandem committed to any school as we currently record this. So, again, Kalen DeBoer, offensive guy, but that Bama logo carries weight everywhere, and that defensive class coming together looks like it's a pretty special one in Tuscaloosa if they can close and hold on to some of the guys that they're trending for. Absolutely.
Wilson Zaire, his brother, played at Auburn, is going to visit. That's interesting. Karon Maycock, Miami Central kid, committed to Florida State. He's going to be visiting. Elijah Golden out of Cardinal Mooney in Sarasota, probably Bama or Notre Dame defensive lineman. He's visiting. They got a lot of guys. So this weekend is huge for the Crimson Tide. I think we'll know if they've got a chance at a top 5 class based on this weekend. And they'll probably have a few kids next weekend too, but this list is important. And a lot of those guys, they're right there for them. So we'll find out. Speaking of Florida State, I asked you this the other day on the phone. Who does Florida State lead for? Sounds like they're going to get Brandon Bennett, the wide receiver from American Heritage, you and I are very familiar with.
Yep.
But besides Brandon, they're in on a bazillion guys.
Right.
Who does Florida State lead for? I have been thinking about that for 48 hours, and I haven't come up with anybody else. So I'm not talking about committed kids.
Right.
Non-committed players. Florida State's official visit list this week, next week, they're both good. But should Florida State fans be a little nervous right now?
I think the answer is yes. The commitment list is solid, very heavy emphasis in state, and very good early execution in state. But as you've talked about on multiple shows, and we've talked about together, about half or more of those in-state recruits are visiting other schools consistently. It's not just a one-off. Xavier Payne's been to 3 or 4 schools. Tadarius Hughes has been to 2 or 3 schools. Karon Maycock has been to like 4 or 5 different schools, and he's going to freaking Bama this weekend. So, yeah, there should be a worry there from the Florida State perspective on their own commitment list. On the flip side of it, as you mentioned, there's been no issue with getting talent on campus. Mike Norvell, that staff, they're thorough. They jump in early. They get kids to Tallahassee. That has never been the issue in town from a recruiting standpoint. Mike's young. He's energetic. He gets it. Kids love Mike Norvell. I mean, I don't know if that's a surprise perceptually, but when kids sit down with him, it resonates. But like you said, how many recruits uncommitted are they trending in the right direction for? it's a small list at this point. They got one commit just the other day on the defensive line, but it's not a whole lot of promise thereafter. So I think Bennett, as you mentioned, the speedy wide receiver from South Florida, they feel good about, but Florida and Georgia are in there as well. So we'll see how that shakes out going into the month of July. I think DQ Forkba could be interesting with Florida State. Georgia kid moves down to IMG Academy. When he made that move early in the new year, Florida State was the school with the most buzz around his name. We mentioned the Seminoles have to recruit the state of Georgia very well, very consistently. And that's a guy through his transition that Florida State felt pretty good about. But then he got to IMG and Florida made a move. Miami made a move. Colorado got him on campus. Michigan is offered. They're getting an official visit. It became a national recruitment in very short order to the point where Florida State looked like it was 2, 3, 4 at best in this recruitment. But again, we said Mike Norvell and company are good at getting kids on campus. Forkba went back to Tallahassee last weekend, and now Florida State is right there with the Florida Gators, in my opinion. He's got Michigan. He's got Miami coming up the next couple weekends. It could shake things up, but as things stand right now, I see this as an old school Florida State battle for a kid in Bradenton, Florida right now. So I don't know if FSU leads, but they're right there for DQ Forkba, who's one of the freakier linebackers from a testing standpoint in this class of 26. But again, if you're talking about 2 4-stars in the entire state of Florida that you feel very, very good about on June 11th, going into the last or second to last official visit weekend of the summer, it's a disappointment from a Florida State perspective. So not the panic button yet, but the worry button is hammering a couple times, a day, if you're a Florida State fan. Absolutely.
Speaking of Florida State, I'll get you out of here on this. Trenton Henderson's a kid that he hasn't been on the camp scene like some of the other kids. Pensacola Catholic, natural pass rusher, like the measurables are off the charts. What's the latest on him, or is this just like we're just going to wait when he pops? Because I have not heard much on him at all.
Well-traveled kid, and that makes things up in the air. Every visit feels like it's very important for Trenton, whether it's Auburn, Michigan. He was at LSU for his first OV, and that really set a strong pace for him to sort of compare other programs to. So when you start in that direction and you've got a Florida in there, you've got a Florida State in there, he's a guy that everyone is trying to get on campus, Oklahoma as well. Every visit seems to throw a wrench into the recruitment. Now, Henderson, I don't believe, as we record this, has a public commitment date. Could be as early as late June into July, but it could last into the season. I think that says a lot, about how open this race could potentially be. Because let's be honest, Brian, if you've got 6 or 7 officials and you're set to commit 4th of July, let's say, which is a very popular date, you're not considering all 6 or 7 of those schools. It's really a 1, 2, 3 team race, maybe at best. But when you're going across the country and there's no, tangible timeline, and you're really, taking your time with this one. And of course, Henderson's coveted enough to take his own time. He's not getting the take it or leave it phone calls that some of these other kids are getting. It really shows that either the lead has fluctuated or there's a long way to go in this recruitment. So I think he's one of the elite Floridians. I think his recruitment, him and Jake Krell, I think those guys can take it maybe longer than most expect in the recruiting process, because they play premium positions and they're coveted from coast to coast. So they'll be in the minority. I think most others will get it done in the next few weeks.
Yeah, I agree. I think to be the better part of 400 commitments from the 1st of June to about 10th or so of July for the Power Four. It's just going to be a bonanza. So, Mr. Garcia, tell everybody where they can find your work.
Yes, sir. Real simple. Rivals.com. A lot going on, and we're just trying to keep up.
Yeah, it is absolutely crazy. You can find the Portal Podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and wherever you download your podcasts on the go. Please like and subscribe and leave us a comment. We truly appreciate it. We'll see you again soon on the Portal Podcast.